At first we thought it was easy, Ian said. Dan nodded. Hello, iceberg, meet Titanic. Probably the most famous maritime disaster in history, Amy agreed. Loved that movie, Ham said. Cried like a 2-year-old. But the Titanic didn't blind anyone, Ian said. That's the thing that stands out. Or maim them. People either drowned or were saved. The Maritimes are in Canada, Amy said. Maybe that's what he's referring to. And then there's the Mont Blanc reference, Ian said. It didn't make sense. That's weird because it's in the Alps, not Canada, Dan said. As a matter of fact, he added, pointing to the massive mountain framed in the copter window, it's right there. Amy leaned forward. Let's plug all the elements that won't make sense into a search engine chain. Canada, Mont Blanc, collision, blindness. Kara's fingers flew. She raised her head, a look of astonishment on her face. Wow, this has got to be it. It happened in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in 1917. One of the greatest disasters at sea ever. A French freighter, the Mont Blanc, collided with another ship in the harbor. A fire detonated the cargo of the freighter, which was carrying hundreds of tons of TNT, plus other explosive materials. That was during World War I, right? Amy asked. Kara nodded as she scrolled through the material. The ship was heading to the front, so it was packed with explosives for weapons. It was massive, the largest man-made blast before the atomic bomb. It killed almost 2,000 people, maiming and blinding thousands more, because it blew out almost every window and turned the glass into flying missiles. It happened at 8:45 in the morning, while people were having breakfast, Amy said. Some in their pajamas. So this nutcase is going to recreate that? Ham asked. Blow up a city? They sat in silence for a moment. Jonah got up. I'll tell my pilot to file a flight plan. Ian looked at Amy and Dan. So, are you in? Amy glanced at Dan. He knew she wouldn't answer without checking in with him. He was the reason they'd gone on this long, aimless journey. What they hadn't been able to admit to each other in the past few months was that maybe they'd grown just the tiniest bit bored. Maybe his life had changed so much that he couldn't go back to being happy just hanging out. So he'd pushed them. From surfing to paragliding, from rock climbing to bungee jumping, from parachuting to wingsuit base jumping. Because after what they'd been through, just being normal wasn't enough. That didn't mean he wanted to jump right back into this. If he ever wrote a book about his family, the title would probably be Those Cahills. Tales of mayhem, backstabbing, and crazy people who think they deserve to love the world. Not love, rule the world. But no way would he walk away from friends in trouble. Simple as that. He didn't have to say a word. Amy recognized his decision. She gave him the tiniest of nods. They were in. "This guy took over our family," Amy said quietly. "We're going to get it back." "Plus, he stole my cat," Dan said. "Try and stop me." Amy stood up. "We'll have to go get our bags," she said. Ian smiled. "No need. We broke into your hotel room and packed your stuff." Hamilton slung his muscled arms over Amy's and Dan's shoulders. "Welcome home." Attleboro, Massachusetts. Nature was cruel, no question about it. Earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, natural disasters were all ruthlessly efficient when it came to population reduction. But when it came to devastation, the outcast would bet on human stupidity every time. He swiped through the images on his screen. He had one last disaster to pick, and it was important not only that the death toll be high, but that it would be symbolic of his eventual victory. Not that the children would necessarily understand this. It would be a small, private pleasure to be savored after he won. He was close to deciding. The disasters would escalate until the last great impossible task. He would restore honor to the Cahill family, glory to the ECAT branch. At last, the ECATs would be where they belonged, in the very seat of power. He would use the Thomas, the Lucians, the Janus, but they would just be tools in his hands. Best of all, at the end of a long life, he would live out the rest of his days holding ultimate power. "You used to tell me that I wasn't ruthless enough, Grace. Remember? So I proved that I was. I had to wait until you were dead to prove it again." The outcast turned off the screen. He sat and surveyed Grace's library. It appeared that the grandchildren had restored it with a meticulous attention to what it had been. There were changes in the mansion of which he did not approve. He would rip out the climbing wall for starters, and the zip line from the attic to the treehouse was ridiculous. But the library was as he remembered it. The deep window seats, the wall-to-wall bookcases, the brass telescope, the rich emerald-colored tiles around the fireplace. All of it belonged to him now. The outcast strolled to the telescope and trained it on the drive. His team was just climbing out of a black SUV. He studied them carefully. He had planned this coup for years and chosen his 5 conspirators with great precision, grooming them, promising them, flattering them, and noting their weaknesses. They did not speak as they walked to the front door. They each kept a few feet of distance between themselves and the rest. Magnus was first, of course, striding toward the front door, his long black coat flapping behind him. They were suspicious of each other. Most likely, despised each other. What difference did it make? They probably despised him, too. He knew some of them were annoyed that they were not invited to stay at the mansion. Goodness knows it was big enough. But it was his at last, and he would not share it. He had rented several apartments for them in Boston instead, anonymous places, luxurious corporate rentals. Patricia O, of course, had demanded a 4-star hotel instead. She was a bore, but useful. He had known her as a young girl, beautiful and delicate and lethal. Now she was old and brittle. Her hair was unnaturally dark, and there were feathered lines in her thin mouth. Her trademark rubies flashed on her fingers in long columns that led to the knuckle. He knew from experience how those stones could tear your skin with one hard slap. She was here to avenge Alistair, her cousin. She believed that he'd been duped by Amy and Dan, had turned soft, had betrayed the E-Cats. The outcast's mouth twisted. What did she know of betrayal? What did anyone know? The greatest betrayal demands the greatest revenge. He tilted the telescope back into place as he heard them enter the house. Their footsteps echoed as they traversed the great hall and headed for him. Patricia entered first, flinging her coat on the wing chair. He had never seen her in a good mood. I need strong coffee. Good day to you too, the outcast said. Berman has set up coffee and tea on the side table. There's cream and sugar as well. I don't take cream. It confuses things. Patricia reached up and patted her elaborate hairdo. Her black hair was piled on top of her head and was anchored there by a large wooden ornament that sat on her head like a crown. I don't see why we have to meet in person, Toby Griffin said, adjusting his black-framed glasses. The only reason the outcast had allowed him into the conspiracy was because he needed a powerful Janus. Toby was a world-famous architect, known for exacting demands and tyrannical trades. But as far as the outcast was concerned, Janus was undependable. Creative geniuses? Sure. But that same originality meant they walked their own path. It didn't matter. Toby was here, just to keep the Janus in line. Magnus remained standing. I think I can deliver all the Thomas leaders, he said. The E-Cats are in line, Patricia said. A few holdouts. The Marads could turn into a problem. Nothing that can't be fixed. The outcast waved his hand. The Lucians are more difficult. Melinda Toth took off her kid gloves, finger by finger. Like all Lucians, she had a sense of drama. She was painfully thin, with a large head that descended into a pointed chin. Naturally, we are leaders, after all, and so we don't like it when someone else is in charge. She slapped her gloves down on the table. I can't guarantee I can deliver a unified branch. Just get enough support and don't bore me with your difficulties, the outcast snapped.